Hey there, fellas. Tim Flug here, long-time listener, first-time caller. Just wanted to drop a line and say, hey, keep up the good work. You know, I'm proud to say I've been listening with you here, guys, from the beginning, and so pretty devoted. But love the podcast, fellas. Just some great work. Want to say first of all, I love that you guys are seeking out the peace. Being friends, uh, seeking to settle your differences, bury the hatchet, especially over movies. What kind of thing can divide two people more than those? So anyway, that's number one. Number two, quality stuff. I like the sound. I like the discussions. I like the sounds of your discussions, your voices. So, just lots of great things to say. Some of my personal favorites, I don't know what's on the docket for upcoming episodes, but love to hear more about some of the greats. Martin Scorsese, John Candy. Don't know if you're familiar with this guy, a bit more of a obscure, but I'm a huge fan. Anything with Don Knotts, especially some of his work in Apple Dumpling Gang. So, anywho, keep up the great work. Can't wait to hear the next episode. Nathan, Brian, you guys, you're the best. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Hello and welcome to Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. Each episode is devoted to one piece of pop culture that we can't agree on. As a way of preserving the friendship and reaching common ground, we revisit the work, hear each other out, and decide whether our friendship truly can survive. I'm Nate Goss.
And I'm Ryan Ebling. This episode we're talking about the 1950 classic All About Eve, which stars Bette Davis as an aging stage actress and Anne Baxter as an up-and-coming actress who maneuvers her way into Davis's circle of friends in an effort to launch her own career. All About Eve was very well received at the time of its release and continues to be well regarded. It garnered a whopping 14 Oscar nominations, which is tied for the most ever. It was also the only movie to have 4 females nominated in the acting categories. It won 6 of those Oscars, none for the 4 female actresses. But the awards it won included Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, and Best Supporting Actor. It was ranked as the 28th greatest movie of all time by the American Film Institute, and it's got a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, Mark Twain said, a classic book is one that people praise and don't read. And I think All About Eve probably falls into that category for many people. So we're revisiting it here, not only to try to come to a better understanding between the two of us, but to also discover whether or not this movie deserves all the praise it receives. At the outset, I say it does. Nate isn't so sure. So can I convince Nate that there's still a few worthy performances left in this old girl? Or will Nate get me to admit that maybe a fresh injection of fire and music is required? Let's find out.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Eve the golden girl, the cover girl, the girl next door, the girl on the moon. Time has been good to Eve. Life goes where she goes. She's been profiled, covered, revealed, reported, what she eats and what she wears and whom she knows and where she was and when and where she's going. Eve. You all know all about Eve. What can there be to know that you don't know?
Okay, that was theater critic Addison DeWitt giving us the perfect introduction for our episode on All About Eve. Basically says it right in the statement there.
That was the titular line.
That's it. Yeah. So I bet you a lot of people are probably wondering, why the heck are we talking about All About Eve? Because it's to us it seemed so obvious.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That we would follow up our last Gladiator episode with
All About Eve.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
As night follows day. All About Eve follows Gladiator in our minds. But
yeah.
For those of you who don't see the connection, the reason we thought to do All About Eve kind of originated at the Oscars this year. Kim Novak appeared, and a lot of people were commenting on her appearance, that she was looking odd.
Kim Novak being sort of the blonde bombshell in Vertigo.
Right. She obviously had some work done, and it didn't look great, and she looked very nervous, and she acted very strangely, and a lot of people were criticizing her for her appearance. And there was actually, after that night, a blogger called Self-Styled Siren put out a blog post called Let's Talk About Kim Novak. And the writer, and we'll actually put that link on our website and on Twitter, the writer laid out very well Kim Novak's history, how when she was a younger actress, she was ridiculed for her appearance and all these other things, and just made to jump through hoops to look beautiful and look young, and it was never good enough for anybody, least of all herself, and kind of takes the reader through what would be going through Kim Novak's mind, that this is her first big appearance in a long time, that she would be nervous, so in an effort to look her best, she kind of panics and has some work done. It's just very
sympathetic to
Kim Novak.
A different perspective that maybe we don't always think about, just being a viewer.
On top of that, this year at the Oscars, there was Sandra Bullock, Cate Blanchett ended up winning. So actresses who are not the young ingenues being recognized, and Cate Blanchett even remarked that it's great that a movie about a middle-aged woman found a market and found awards. So All About Eve is about this struggle of older actresses still trying to be relevant, still trying to be employed after their beauty is perceived to have faded.
In fact, in that post on the Self-Styled Siren, the line that caught me the most was when the writer said, "This is 2014, and we're on our way to curing women of the worst thing that can happen to them, getting old." This is why we're bringing this up, because you had in the nominations a lot of older actresses, but then you still had a very obvious trend of it being still very difficult for an aging actress to find good quality parts in Hollywood. And that was even remarked on by Tina Fey in the Golden Globes this year, when she was talking about Meryl Streep's nomination for August Osage County, where she said, "Meryl Streep so brilliant in August Osage County, proving that there are still great parts in Hollywood for Meryl Streep's over 60," which was a great line. But we're post award season now, but I think that it was something that was very obvious to us as we were just discussing awards season, and we thought, maybe we should kind of revisit these themes a little bit, and All About Eve is the perfect place to do that. But also, as we know, the whole purpose of this podcast is to actually choose films that we don't quite agree on.
Right.
So All About Eve is also perfect because it fits that theme, but it's also one that when you looked at our what we had sort of rated this movie, we differ quite a bit on it.
So why don't I start? I'll tell you what I remember before I rewatched the movie, what I remember about the movie and why I rated it so highly. It's been a long time since I saw this movie. I saw it in college. Actually, I saw it as an assignment for the film class that Nate and I took at the same time, even though we went to college together and we knew of each other in college. We weren't friends in college. And it was this film class that we would hear each other talk and kind of say, like, maybe we could be friends. But we both, for some reason, assumed that the other person didn't like us. Yeah. So it was in that class that I first watched it. I remember it being a film that it felt like it was ahead of its time, with its unlikable characters, no real clear-cut hero. Nobody looks great in this movie. Though at the time in movies, I was more interested in visual things. I really liked directors who were visually innovative and a little flashy. This movie's not visually all that special.
Sure.
I did get, I was impressed by the script and the performances, which stands to reason because this film is generally lauded for its script and performances. So I wasn't really, breaking ground in the appreciation of this movie.
So after you watched it the first time, where did it stand with some of your all-time favorite movies? I just kind of, I'm trying to get a picture of where this stood out to you. Was it sort of, was it a game changer for you, or did it end up becoming one of your all-time favorites?
Well, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think it was one of my all-time favorites. It's usually not one that comes to mind when I think of movies that I really like. It was a game changer in that I hadn't seen a lot of movies from the 50s that were so cutting and so cynical, I think. So for me, it just kind of opened my eyes to what film from that era could be. That it wasn't all,
it surpassed your expectations of what a 1950s film could be.
Yeah,
kinda.
I mean, as a what I was 19 or 20. Yeah, as a 19 or 20-year-old, it blew away everything I knew about 1950s.
Yeah, all those other 4 movies that you had seen from the 1950s.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Well, let me talk a little bit about what my experience was watching this the first time. So what do I remember about my All About Eve experience? Honestly, not much. After that film class we were both in, I decided that I was going to go on a crusade in my mid-20s to fill my brain with all the essential American films that you have to view in order to have any credibility in film discussion.
Right.
All About Eve is going to be on that list.
Yeah.
If you want to be able to talk film and you haven't seen All About Eve, you're going to eventually run into somebody who's going to say, I can't really listen to what you have to say. Right. So I had just a stack of movies to watch. My mind was broadening and bending every which way as it soaked up Hitchcock and Wells and Lynch and P.T. Anderson, Altman, all the other filmmakers I could later name drop. And
you were loading up on your
my ammunition and so but in that crusade there were spare moments of confusion. There were a handful of movies that left me perplexed as the credits rolled because I was wondering, was I missing something? I thought I had read enough background beforehand to allow the proper contextual interpretation of the film, to kind of understand where it was coming from. Maybe with All About Eve, I had reached a saturation point. I don't really know, because all the other movies I was watching at that time were so self-apparently good. And if they weren't, in my opinion, good, they were at least challenging.
Yeah.
And this time, the most challenging part about it was that I was bored, which I guess goes back to your Gladiator critique from last episode, which we need to get past that, I think, of just being bored, which you did in the last episode. I'm not faulting you on that. Okay. But the challenge to me was actually trying to figure out why it should be set apart when I first watched it.
Okay.
The bottom line was that after watching it the first time, I really couldn't have cared less about these characters, which I think is a big problem for a character-driven drama.
Right.
I didn't remember a single thing about the movie itself. I couldn't recite a single line of dialogue, which was supposedly some of the best Hollywood ever had to offer.
Right.
And I remember, vaguely when I watched it, I remembered the movie commenting on the entertainment industry's disposable treatment of its stars and things like that. But I thought, at this time I was also watching, like I said, I had my stack of movies. I watched Sunset Boulevard, Billy Wilder's Sunset, and it came out the exact same year, 1950.
Yeah.
And to me, it was so much more biting, so much more engrossing, and just, in my opinion, just such a better movie. So I guess that was my first experience with it, and it had been years. This was 2005, 2006, and so I'm really looking forward to viewing this again and revisiting it, because like I said, I kind of feel like I just missed something, and I thought maybe I'd catch it with a couple years of experience between it. Viewing this.
That's interesting that you bring up Sunset Boulevard. I think it's a very apt comparison in that they both deal with aging stars. They're very different movies. I would probably say that I was more entertained by Sunset Boulevard back then too, just because it's a murder mystery, or it's a film noirish. It starts off with that iconic. Yeah. So, like I said, I was more into visuals, and Sunset Boulevard is much more visually appealing.
Yes, yeah, but I think the comparison is one that is often made. In fact, I was reading over before this podcast, I was reading, Roger Ebert actually talked a lot about the comparison. He made some really good points. They're both, he's talking about Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson. They're both playing great stars who are now aging. Davis plays Margot Channing realistically, while Swanson plays Norma Desmond as a gothic waxwork, is what he calls it. And Sunset Boulevard, but he even admits Sunset Boulevard seems like the better film today. Maybe because it fits our age of irony, is what he says. Maybe because Billy Wilder was a better director than Joseph Mankiewicz. But Davis' performance is stronger than Swanson's because it's less mad and more touching, which I think is a very interesting comment to make. That while Ebert is saying that this is Sunset Boulevard to him is maybe the better lasting film, he thinks Davis hands down is the better performance in that.
I would agree with that. There are also, I mean, some differences. Gloria Swanson has lost her status.
Yeah.
Whereas Betty Davis feels her slipping away, so she's trying to keep a grip on it. There's some difference to that. I mean, but we're not necessarily trying to compare the two right now.
Right. I do, not right now, but I think it's something maybe I would like to get back into when we talk about rewatching the movie.
Okay.
I think.
How about this time? I think I would agree with you actually. When I first saw it, I didn't remember quotable lines, but this time around there were just line after line that really stuck out to me. If we want to start there, start simply with, was this a quotable movie?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's start with
hard-hitting stuff. I mean, there's the very famous buckle your seatbelts, we're in for a bumpy night, or whatever she says.
It's something along those lines. It's been sort of revamped a couple times by
one of those lines that gets misquoted as often as it gets quoted.
Yeah.
But so what did you think this time? Was it a bit more memorable of a movie for you?
Memorable, yes. I think that it was. I will agree with you that the dialogue certainly stood out to me a lot more this time around. I could kind of see why so many regard it as possibly one of the best screenplays of all time. There are some great. I also think even in just the tone of the dialogue, you were talking about it having sort of this cynical tone to it, which is so obvious. And quick side note, I kind of think that is why so many critics love this movie, is because it's cynical, and maybe because the critic in the movie gets to bring Marilyn Monroe in as a date, but that's neither here nor there. But the dialogue certainly stood out to me a lot more. A lot of the lines I thought were really well written, really well delivered, certainly much more memorable. So I took that with me. Now, whether I would go from really not liking this movie to all of a sudden loving it, I just can't do that. I can bump it up a bit to liking this movie, but I think sometimes we're giving it a little bit more credibility than it really deserves. I don't mean to kind of linger on Sunset Boulevard, but I think that there are some interesting things being said in that sort of portrayal of the aging star and the industry kind of running away that, at least for me, are just a little bit more interesting. Okay. For instance, I think that in that one, it's not so much about the Gloria Swanson character, Norma Desmond, being replaced. It's just that the industry's moving faster than she is. Yeah. And that to me is maybe it's not so character driven. It's more based on the sort of a theme, I guess. But I think that to me was a little bit more interesting to explore. And then All About Eve, it's more about really the younger actress coming in and taking her place. Even though Gloria Swanson's portrayal is so much more over the top and comical almost in some ways, I actually related to it a little bit more than Betty Davis's, just because I had a hard time feeling sorry for someone as kind of, in some ways, bratty as Betty Davis. Now, I think that's an interesting topic in itself that we should definitely talk about. So I don't mean to just push past that. But I feel like in Sunset Boulevard, there isn't even room for that sort of jealousy and bickering, the harsh realities. They just don't have time for that cattiness. Like you said, they're not very likable characters. That's fine in a movie to have characters that aren't likable. Yeah. But I feel like, and this is admittedly me sort of watching it through my lens of what we watch now. But I feel like we see so many other television shows and movies that deal with unlikable characters in a much more interesting way than All About Eve does.
Okay, that's fine. I feel like, though, it's unfair, certainly to the movie, to compare it to other things so frequently that things 60 years later have
built upon.
That it's foundational. And I think that watching All About Eve this time, I noticed something. Sunset Boulevard is about a lot of things that aren't just an aging actress. It's about the shift from silent to sound.
Yeah.
It's any trend. You could have made a movie about like stage to screen, or vaudeville losing its appeal, like anything. It's I think it's broadly applicable in
about
that way.
About YouTube,
any big shift,
versus the
sure,
Hollywood industry,
right? How YouTube was derailed by
attention
Vine.
screenwriters. I just gave you an Oscar-winning idea.
That's right. So I feel like there are similarities between All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard that make it easy to compare, but I feel like in general they're very different movies, that they're trying to approach very different topics, that an aging actress is just one of a few things that would make them comparable. Watching All About Eve this time, I noticed that this movie is not, for me, it wasn't just about acting or Hollywood or entertainment. It's not even just about two actresses. This movie felt very much about men and women in general. And I really have to bristle at the calling Bette Davis bratty, because I feel like that was something that this movie was doing. I wrote down, is this movie misogynist? Because Bette Davis has very real concerns.
Mm-hmm.
She sees that for no reason other than she's getting older, she's going to get pushed out.
Right.
And the men in her life consistently call her paranoid, even though she's not wrong.
Right.
They call her paranoid. What other words do they say? They Lloyd tells her, nobody cares how old you are. You can play any age. She knows the truth, that her days are numbered because she's getting older. And I think it's really interesting the way the men react to her throughout the movie, the way they react to Eve, because she's younger and prettier. It's like they feel like they need to protect her and feel like they're controlling her, when in reality she's manipulating them the whole time. I found a lot more to take away about what women are allowed to be in society. There's that great scene where she talks about how a woman has to learn to be a woman once her career's over.
Things you drop on your way up the ladder so you can move faster. You forget you'll need them again when you get back to being a woman. It's one career all females have in common, whether we like it or not: being a woman. Sooner or later, we've got to work at it, no matter how many other careers we've had or wanted. And in the last analysis, nothing's any good unless you can look up just before dinner or turn around in bed, and there he is. Without that, you're not a woman. You're something with a French provincial office or a book full of clippings. But you're not a woman.
Because you're not allowed to be a woman when you're a career. You have to be a man.
To me, that is a key scene in the movie. I love that scene. I really do. To me, that was it did beg the question for me of asking whether Bette Davis is actually a stronger woman, or if she, like I said before, is kind of a brat. Now,
and I think that in this world, certainly in the world of All About Eve, and probably in the world in general, there is no room for a strong woman. She's called bratty or bitchy or paranoid or bossy. She's not called assertive. She's not called a go-getter. And I think that one thing that isn't addressed in the movie, probably pointedly, is that there's nobody threatening Lloyd Richards as the writer, or Bill as the director, or Max as the producer. There's no question as to whether they're going to keep working. They're going to keep working because they're good at their job.
That's a good point.
Bette Davis is good at her job, but she's not going to keep working because she's just getting older.
Sure.
And I think that this time around, I noticed that the movie is about that more broadly, about men and women, how men react to women who are getting older. They don't see it as a legitimate concern that she is actually right about. She's right that she's losing it all.
Yeah.
So to me,
I'm with you. I just think it's hard to be that sympathetic to characters that are that insulated, I guess. Like, you can see that shift, and that's, you got to get pretty far into the movie before you get to that. That scene in the car where she's talking about the career of being a woman.
That's true.
And that no matter what, you know, and she's making a great point. Sooner or later, you've got to work it out, got to work at it being a woman, and that without a man, you're not a woman. Those are very interesting. It's a great line.
When she says she
line.
doesn't need to be in the play because now she's got a husband, and before she had nothing to do with her time, now she's going to have a husband.
Right. Now, that is very interesting.
When Karen says that she has no talent to offer besides loving her husband.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and I will agree with you that this movie is doing some very cool things and interesting things with gender roles, and for the time saying some very forward things, and they're doing it in a very subtle way. It's not heavy-handed. This is a question I'd like to ask is, I honestly think I would like this movie a ton more if it wasn't a movie, if it was a TV series, because I think that you see some shifts in character that don't feel natural in the short period of this movie. That you can go from Bette Davis being at the very beginning someone who, I don't think it's unfair to say that she's being portrayed as kind of, completely full of herself, almost delusional to the point of, where she can actually be broadsided by someone like Eve.
That's true.
And that to me, it almost took too long for me to actually feel for her at that point. By the time you get to the car scene, I was already kind of like, well, big whoop. You kind of did it to yourself. I mean, you basically went in and became this prima donna. And I have a hard time feeling sorry for a prima donna that gets knocked down a few notches.
Yeah.
I think that if anything, if you had it in like a TV series where you could kind of see that arc play out over time, and then also see the character of Eve play out a little bit longer over time, because honestly, her maneuvering, her the way that she inserts herself, the game that she plays, I started noticing, and I thought it was very interesting on Twitter. Someone, she goes by Library Girl 17. She had watched All About Eve and made a comment on Twitter to us, where she said, "I watched today. Interesting. No one was very likable, which seems on trend for many of today's TV shows and movies." I think that was a very good point. It's exactly what I had written down in my notes. But the funny thing is, today's TV shows and movies do a lot more with Eve's character than this movie gave Eve. There's a lack of the humanizing element in Eve that I think is another reason why I have a hard time thinking that this movie is as great as a lot of people think it is. It just seemed to be like, well, she's just an innately evil person, or someone who's just so driven by ambition that they'll do absolutely anything. Yeah. And I think we've seen a lot of TV shows where that's the exact character that's the protagonist in the show, the anti-hero. Yeah. Eve is, to me, one of the movie's first real anti-heroes, but she's never really given enough time to be that, to fully flesh that out.
Yeah. It could be interesting from that perspective. But again, I think the movie is more about the inevitability of Margot's fading away. And Eve is a threat to that, and a villain, and scary, and I think more effectively so because we don't see a lot of her. We don't know what's going on in her head. We just experience it with Margot. I think the movie plays it out very well, and I mean, it's within the constraints of a movie. I mean, we it's not a TV show. It would be. I would find it interesting to see it as a TV show played out longer.
I can't fault it for that,
right? And
necessarily.
I think that Eve is a complex character, and is depicted as such through the way that people react to her. Everybody still sees her as fragile. There are several times in the movie where people tell her, "Don't cry," and she's not crying. Mm-hmm. They just are seeing what they want to see. And I think that the movie allows her for that. There's not a change because she never had to change. It was always there. It was just whether we saw it or not. What you see is, maybe a too sudden of a shift. I don't think there was a shift that needed to occur.
You're talking about the shift in Eve, or the shift
in Eve?
Okay. Maybe what I'm trying to say is that we know these characters are unlikable. If I have to spend that much time with unlikable characters, I kind of at least want it to be fun. And the way for it to be fun is for you to at least understand where that unlikability is coming from, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you get it a little bit with Margot, and you get it in like the car scenes and things like that. You can start to sympathize with her, and it's an amazing performance. And that is almost like you can kind of the movie sort of peels away her layers as it goes on.
Right.
You get to see more of Margot as it goes on. And I don't feel like you really get that with Eve at all. I mean, I was waiting for it. I was waiting for some sort of moment where you kind of understood where she was coming from a little bit.
I think you're seeing, for me, you see, I think it succeeds because you see it's almost like escalators that you see their paths crossing. You see where Margot's layers came from as you see Eve building her layers up. And the movie ends more or less with, obviously, with Eve at where Margot was in the beginning. I don't think that maybe it doesn't spell it out in some sort of like flashback where we saw Eve do this to somebody before and now that suddenly makes what she's doing to Margot credible. I don't think we need that. And I feel like you're saying that if something, you're going to have a hard time appreciating something if it's not better or the same as something you've already seen. Like it didn't do what Breaking Bad or The Wire did.
No. I mean, maybe I'm not presenting.
Maybe not
what I'm feeling. I guess.
I guess I can't tell you why you didn't connect with the movie. That's just. I mean, but I can tell you things that I think you might be missing, complexities that you miss. The character of Birdie, who's only in it for a brief time.
She seems to be the only one that gets it in the movie.
Gets what?
Gets anything. I mean, she kind of has this almost bird's eye view of what's going on.
Hey, there you go.
That's exactly
that's true. She's the one who immediately doesn't like Eve,
right?
Because she sees through it somehow.
Yeah.
But what I also think is interesting and is where the movie is in one of the instances where the movie gives more complexity than you're giving it credit for is, we find out that she was a vaudevillian actor, and she is now more or less Margot's maid. And I think she's a fascinating character, partly because she's so observant, she's funny, she's smart, but she was a star. She was a performer who is now waiting hand and foot on the current performer,
right?
Margot.
Okay,
Margot doesn't have any sympathy for her. She just has barbs regarding the career that she's lost. She uses it snidely to call her a fifth-rate vaudevillian, and Birdie stands up for herself and tells her where she had performed and for whom and that sort of thing. That's a very brief thing that it doesn't need to devote an hour-long episode to Birdie's backstory, but we get it. And now we see that Margot has usurped somebody else's position. You've also got this thing where... for me, one of the things that was just infinitely intriguing is the award ceremony that bookend the film. You've got the very cynical voiceover opening talking about Eve and talking about actors and writing, which I think is also very funny that it's denying the actors acting time by just reading off the script over their faces.
I did notice there's not a single performance in this whole movie. You never actually see anybody doing any acting.
Right. And that's one of the questions the movie asks frequently is what's truth? Is life, are you different on stage and off stage? Who are you really? What's true really? Which is another, I think, wrinkle of complexity that you may have passed over. That cynical opening 5 minutes is followed up by this glowing description of Eve by the guy who's presenting the award, this glowing, and so immediately we see the phoniness of that whole thing, and then in the end, Eve's acceptance speech, where
it's certainly phony by that
we've
point.
We've seen the way she's just cut everybody down and used people and was just awful to all these people, and then in the end is talking about them like they're her good friends, and it makes me think every acceptance speech I've ever
Right,
heard.
that does happen. Yeah, I
Where,
thought
like-
the same thing happened to me too.
So
you
to
know,
me, the
you
movie-
wonder the background of all of these.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the movie's got that. I mean, that's sort of timeless, unfortunately, that this is the same sort of thing that happens.
Sure.
I think of John Ridley, who won Best Screenplay, and then for 12 Years a Slave this year.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve McQueen not clapping and all that sort of, because there was this bad blood where John Ridley refused to let Steve McQueen be a credited screenwriter on it and all that stuff.
Didn't know any of that.
Like,
yeah.
to me, it's one of the things that makes the movie timeless, because it's the way it portrays that is subtle-ish. I mean, it's not like it doesn't draw attention to the fact that it's doing any of these things, but it is, and it adds to the unsettlingness of it. It adds to it adds complexity to Eve's character, because she's still playing the game even though she's on top of all that stuff.
How can I repay the many others? So many I couldn't possibly name them all. Whose help, guidance, and advice have made this the happiest night of my life possible.
Maybe moving on from that, I wondered what you think of this question. Could this movie have been made about men? About two men?
And a baby.
2 men and a baby. Well, that would be 3 men, but...
Let's see. Are you talking about a movie? How exact are you talking? Are you talking about like a movie where you have, a successful male and another younger potential male sort of, competing and trying to climb up that ladder?
Right. I guess what I'm getting at is the way that the movie is about broader themes than just acting. I guess specifically, could this movie be about 2 male actors, an older male actor and a younger male actor?
You might be right. I don't know if this could be made with 2 male characters in the same exact way. Maybe in, I don't know. Maybe in a different industry, it could have worked.
Yeah.
One that's not so based on youth or age. But you do see it a lot in movies that are about like a skill industry or something like that, where the new guys sort of come in and slowly kind of push the older guys out because they can no longer adapt or keep up with what's happening in the company or in whatever. They're just doesn't that happen in I'm trying to remember Glenn Ross a little bit. You see the older gentleman sort of, he just can't quite adapt to the changing pace of things. It's a different kind of thing,
that's a good example. That is a good example. I feel though that often maybe not so much Glenn Ross, but to a point, it's more that the men can't do what they're doing anymore. That like things are changing so much that they literally cannot do it as well. In this movie, Eve is not better than Margot.
No, and that's actually
Margot's talent is not fading. It's just this world that has been created by men that that talent has nothing on youth. There are things about the movie that kind of I had questions about. The reason I wrote I wrote misogynist with a question mark. That's not something I would like about a movie if it was misogynist. But I feel like the movie, maybe it's just that it's from the 50s and we've got different views on women at the time, but I feel like it's a little bit divided in what it thinks about it. I think it definitely does address the broader issue of, can a woman be a woman without a husband? Or can a woman be a woman? Can a woman have a career and be a woman? Can they not necessarily be girly and be a woman? Can they not be conventionally pretty and still be a woman? I think the movie does address that, but I think there are also a lot of ways.
But
I'm not sure if
going back to what you're talking about whether a woman can be a woman without a man, you would think that if it was trying to make a really, I guess, progressive statement on that, not that you would have Margot necessarily say, I don't need a man, Bill. I'm not saying that, but you would at least, I think, see Margot. You get this sense when you see that when they finally get engaged, that this is the way that she's going to be fulfilled. And I think
that's what I'm saying. That's what I was saying too.
Okay.
I was saying that when I said that Margot realized that she had love and acceptance the whole time from the people around her, and allowing herself to give into that and finally enter into real relationship with Bill, get engaged, get married. I think that was good for her.
But it also
then you've
sends the
also-
message
a little bit
that was what that was what was going to fulfill her, was to have
it
the
does.
man. You know?
And that concerns me. Another thing that makes me question it, and this might be a little thing, in the credits, the women only have first names. All the men have first and last names.
Really?
And that made me think it's like a systemic thing with the movie. Like, why is it Margot, even though the whole time we know it's Margot Channing?
Right.
It's not like she was just Margot the whole time. But then it's, everybody, all the men have first and last names.
I noticed that even on IMDb, and I was
Right.
wondering why they just say Margot. And I know it's Margot Channing. I just watched this movie. It's not a secret what their last names are. But yeah, if you
Right.
go to IMDb, it doesn't list their last name.
But
It's
it was
very
in the credits
interesting,
that way. And so that just made me, in general, think, what is the screenwriter, the movie, everybody who made the movie, what was their view on this?
Mm-hmm.
Am I reading into it the broader male-female relationship, or was it actually written into the script? Because there are some times where it contradicts itself, like when Eve gives the understudy performance, and the performance is great and all that stuff. Bill comes to comfort her, and he genuinely cares about her and things. But he also...
You're talking about the scene where Margot comes in, and this is after Eve gives the performance.
And the reviews
and
are in the paper.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And Bill says, Bill's here, everything's all right. That the men think that they are all their women have. Like,
there's also a strange scene there where he kind of pins her down too, which was a little. I'm sure it was fine for the time, but it
it might
for
be
now
just
it just
a time
seems,
thing. But they never validate her fears. They just keep saying, "You're beautiful. You're talented. Who
You got
cares
nothing to
what
worry
they
about,
think?
yeah.
You're fine. You're fine. You're beautiful." In a way, I don't think the movie really validates the fear, the real fear and the real concern that she has, that she can do nothing to avoid this, because this is the way that the system has been set up.
You might be actually doing a better job of sort of illuminating to me right now maybe what the core issue I have with the movie is. I'm not just trying to piggyback on what your critique is and saying, yeah, that's the one, that's the one.
Sure.
But one thing I realized that kind of bugged me, and I couldn't really explain why, was the very, very end of the movie, the last scene. This is when Phoebe comes. Phoebe is this new young actress who you realize is now starting to kind of stalk Eve after she's won this big award. That is an interesting plot development, and I think that is maybe where it's selling short what you're saying the movie could be about. I mean, the movie could be saying some very interesting things about women of the time, the misogynistic aspect you're talking about.
Right.
I think what it comes down to is maybe at the very end, I kind of feel like the movie betrays all of the time it had spent warming you up to these characters, and then instead really makes the movie completely about that very simple message of just, there's always a replacement. There's always, because all of a sudden it's weird, after that speech, after everything, the characters, nothing about those characters is, I'm not looking for resolution, but you even the things that they were dealing with, you never get any sort of further closure, I guess is a good word. It's like all of a sudden, who cares about what happened to Margot or that insecure engagement with Bill? But really, like the relationships between any of these people, for that matter, they just kind of stop. And then all of a sudden, the movie takes this turn, and it really just basically caps it all off with, yep, this is what the movie was about. It was about this. And I guess in a way, it's like, are we left treating these characters with as much distance and disposability as the movie supposedly critiques? I
don't think so. I think that it's not so explicit in explaining this, but I think that we are to understand that Margot's in a good place, that she is not as insecure as she had been.
She's got like that scowl on her face the whole time.
She still hates Eve. I mean, she's not a saint now.
I think that's debatable, though, whether you can come away with that movie thinking she's in a better place or not.
All right, well, then maybe we should debate it, because I think it's very important. I think that she is in a better place. After Eve has her award, Eve says, "My heart is in New York, but even though I'm going to Hollywood, all that stuff." And Eve says, Margot says, "You can always put that award where your heart is, or where your heart's supposed to be," or something like that, implying she doesn't have a heart, and that the award is going to, for Eve, fulfill it. And I think that insight by Margot is, to me, indicative that she understands that it's not about the awards and it's not about that sort of things, that you still have to have a heart.
I could see that reading. I think it's a fine interpretation of it. That line happens so quickly, and then it moves on.
Well, that's the thing. That's what makes it a great script, and for me, a great movie is that it's not crash. It's not pounding
Right.
every message into your head. It's not Gladiator.
Except for that last scene
It's
where
not,
it's pounding it into your head. Exactly.
Hang on. It's not Gladiator where you have to have every money line screamed. Like, it's just a movie that is subtle, and
Yeah, this is. I mean, it's a smart movie in that sense. I mean, I'm not debating that. I don't saying that she has to deliver the line and then look at the camera or something like that. You know, it just. I think that line, for me at least, maybe wasn't saying as much as you think it's saying. To me, it was just kind of the one moment where, Margot gets to kind of say something to Eve to kind of hit her where it hurts.
I think it's that too, because she's still Margot. She's still a biting, sarcastic, clever person. It's a consistent character. The way I'm reading it is that the movie, if you choose to read it the way I read it, that it's about, in part, learning to focus your drive and your need for love on the correct things.
You're highlighting things in this movie that I maybe didn't catch as much when I viewed it, even the second time around. In general, your more charitable viewing of it is something that I needed, because I need to kind of be able to look at it in some ways that I hadn't really thought about before. And it is an honest movie. I'll give it that. You know?
Well, I think we covered a lot more ground than I thought we would. I didn't know exactly how different our opinions would be in this, but Betty Davis warned us it would be a bumpy night, and it was more so than I expected.
A bit of turbulence, yeah.
But I think that we both see different things about the movie now. I'm glad that you are willing to admit that I make some good points.
Yes, you did make some great points, and I am willing to say that I do like this movie now. I still have a hard time thinking that it's this thing that deserves the 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And
I think it still does. Speaking of which, let's talk about the poll. I don't think so many of our listeners had seen this movie, so we didn't have real high voting numbers. Tell us how it shook out. I voted love it. I'm not sure if there was anybody else who did. Did you vote not a fan?
Well, yes, I did.
Ooh.
But the thing is, on our poll, we've really made you kind of choose between love it, like it, or not a fan. And I wish there was somewhere where there was sort of like I can appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, the thing is, like, do I like it? Do I see myself wanting to pop this in and watch it? Again anytime soon? Not really.
Really? Even after all the great points I made?
Well, maybe if I could watch it with some sort of Ryan Ebling commentary. I just had to choose not a fan because this is more on the personal sort of level. I mean, it's just not a movie that I would consider to be one of, up there with some of my favorites at all, or even one that I would necessarily recommend to people.
Wow, really? Okay. You wouldn't even, now would you change that? Would you recommend this to people? Would you say like it at this point, at least? Give me that.
Again, I'll say I appreciate this movie for what it was doing at the time, in its place at the time. Anyways, let's talk about the poll.
Okay.
The way the poll shook out, we have 17%, one vote for Love It.
Yay.
I wonder who that was. And then we have...
It was me.
Okay, no secret there. And then we have 50%, so that's half, like this movie.
Sure.
And then there were 33%, 2 votes for not a fan.
Not a fan.
So I think that in general, like it seems to be winning it out in this film. So, I mean, it does seem to be a movie that, for our listeners at least, I don't know that they would put it in the sort of pantheon of great films, that it would just kind of linger in the camp of, it's a pretty good movie,
Well, if you have seen it, I would suggest rewatching it, because I learned, I appreciated new things about it.
And I did too. I did appreciate new things about it on a rewatch, so I do think it merits a good rewatching if you haven't done so.
If you haven't seen the movie and you're still listening to the podcast,
what are you doing?
I would suggest you go see the movie and then maybe re-listen to the podcast.
Well, this podcast is just the beginning of the conversation, really. So
Right.
we want to definitely open it up. Please comment on our website, canwestillbefriends.net. Keep the conversation going. Give us a phone call, too. It would be great to hear from you guys. We got a phone number that you can call and leave us a message, 847-306-9532. Give us your thoughts. We might even catch you on the air next time in the episode. Let us know on Facebook, Can We Still Be Friends Podcast on Facebook, or on Twitter, CWSBF. That's right. Yeah, that's the acronym. Yep, that's the one. We just
SoundCloud, iTunes.
It's all there.
Subscribe on iTunes. Leave a rating and a review. Really help us out. Tell your friends to listen to us. We really appreciate you guys listening. So Nate, why don't you tell us what our next movie is going to be? What can people look forward to watching with us?
Well, spring is here, even though it doesn't feel like it.
Ish, yeah.
And we wanted to feel like it, so we basically wanted to choose a nice, warm movie that had some relevancy. So with spring training going on and baseball's on the mind, we're going to actually talk about one of my favorite baseball movies and sports movies in general, The Sandlot.
I have a feeling that you are going to have a lot of people on your side for this one, and I hope that people can still look me in the eye after they hear
an eye badly bruised by a baseball.
An eye badly bruised, yeah. My indifference towards The Sandlot. Well, I mean, I look forward to watching it again. Hopefully you can open my eyes.
Yeah, and feel free, before we actually do the podcast, get on that poll, tell us what you think, but also let us know on Twitter and anywhere. Let us know what you think about The Sandlot before we talk about it, because we might bring it into the conversation.
Yeah, leave us a voicemail, find us on Twitter, comment on our website.
Do it all.
Yeah. Maybe you can be our favorite listener by hitting us up on every possible platform.
Hitting a grand slam, as we might call it.
Gosh, all right.
See you later.